Hello everyone, this is Ep2. Welcome back to the Land of Empires. And today I want to make another video on the Apex Arena, focusing once again on Season 6. And the reason why I focus on Season 6 is simply because it has the biggest pool of players. If we were to look at the other seasons, like going to all the way to server 100 plus, they have just reached Season 5, and actually they will reach Season 6 within a couple of weeks. And the reason why focusing on the other seasons is more difficult is simply due to the player differences, the power differences. So there will be a lot of instances where one side has very high glorious troops and the other side has significantly lower glorious troops, to the extent that winning and losing would simply be due to a power difference rather than an actual difference in heroes and troop composition. Now, since there are over 100 servers now in Season 6, I think it will be very interesting to cover all the variations that people are using and how people are dealing with various different kinds of defenses. And I could probably make multiple videos on this, and I think within each video, we would learn something new about the dynamics of Season 6 combat. So diving straight in the first fight, we have Young OG versus Brunner. And taking a look at the composition that Brunner ran, we can immediately see that he ran Season 6, the whole Season 16, but with Season 6 armor. So this is a very weak composition, not necessarily because it is weak, but rather it kind of handicaps your whole setup, because the Season 6 armor setup is very strong, equipped on Kellerman, Quinn, and Lisbeth, or some other combination. If you use the Season 6 armor on the Season 6 heroes themselves, who already have the Season 6 skills, there is really just a redundant overlap that could have been used on another team instead. So there's no point in going over that fight. And now we dive into the first interesting clash between Ifhif, who is actually one of the strongest players right now in the Land of Empires, against Joe Zero, who is quite respectively strong himself. Now, if we compare the stats, we can immediately see quite a big difference between Ifhif and Joe Zero, not only in terms of infantry, but also in terms of cavalry and the archer, as well as overall stats. Now, keep in mind, overall stats are part of the support mechanic of the Apex Arena. The higher your support, the higher your stats, your total stats will be buffed. But it does look like that Ifhif and Joe Zero got relatively even support, so it all comes down to the stats themselves. Now, if we look at the composition, keep in mind that Ifhif is the attacking side and Joe Zero is the defending side. We can see that Ifhif chose to run the full Season 6 team against Joe Zero's Season 5 with the Season 6 archer. Now, this is interesting because the Season 6 archer does not really provide a very good awakening buff. So Joe Zero here, what he's saying in this team is that he is confident that Ifhif's first team is not going to break through his first team. And indeed it did not, because by using the Season 6 archer instead of the Season 5 archer with the Season 6 armor, you are making the Season 6 team weaker. But if you can survive Ifhif's Season first team, then you don't really need to make your Season 5 team that much stronger. So this is a good move from Joe Zero. And Ifhif was not able to break through. Let's see how close the matchup was. So this is actually fairly close. So whenever you have an infantry count that is lower than, say, 80 to 90,000, anything lower than 100,000, then there is actually a possibility that your next team can have their archers survive. So this does depend on the gap in the strengths between you and your opponent. If you are much stronger than your opponent, then actually it doesn't matter too much whether he has 80,000 or 120,000. You will be able to keep your archer alive without committing too many troops to the archer unit. And I think this is the case for Ifhif. So let's see what he ran in the next composition. And this is really kind of what I disagree on, the effectiveness of running your third team as your first or second team. I guess the purpose of running this team is to be able to defeat the remaining single infantry type left over from the first team. And it's actually very hard to do that if you are the attacker rather than the defender, because let's see the composition if ran. So if he wanted to kill Kellerman, first of all, he should have used Hanzo instead of Lisbeth. I don't think Lisbeth is a very good move here. First of all, because Lisbeth does not really have an awakening skill. Her awakening skill is associated with her rage skill, and therefore whenever you equip an armor for those heroes, the awakening skill gets overwritten by absolutely nothing. So it basically disappears. So he is basically using a crippled Lisbeth together with Quinn and Michael. And instead, if you were to use Hanzo, for example, your composition would be able to deal at least 15% more damage. Not to mention, Hanzo is also a much more superior unit compared to Lisbeth in terms of damage. And the issue really here is that, well, first of all, it cannot deal much damage because this composition is more of a defensive composition. And versus the Season 6 setup here, especially Kellerman, who can also bring the disarm as his passive, you simply will not be able to deal that much damage even though he has very few numbers of troops left. So if I had Hanzo, I would run something like 100,000 for my infantry, maybe 20,000 for my Michael, and the rest on Hanzo. And that is really to just deal enough burst damage so that the Kellerman can fall with your second team. Of course, personally, if I was in this situation, I wouldn't even be running my third team as my second team, and I will talk about that. I'll talk about why in a bit. So let's see If's composition. So this composition is very, very bad. This is not too bad of a composition if he was playing defense, but he is playing offense, and this setup really just deals no damage, and you can see the result is evident. Kellerman was able to survive, and If's team was also able to survive, but because he is the attacker, the team is dead. So now we have If's third team versus Joe's third team. I mean Joe's second team. And I would say in this position, If has already lost, because even if he is able to somehow win against the Joe Zero's team, it is a little difficult for Kellerman alone as an attacker to overcome Joe's third team. So if we take a look at Joe's third team, it is a fairly poor setup because once again, this is Charlotte using Lisbeth's armor, which is completely pointless, I think. Hanzo is so much superior. I think it's already a lost cause because his Kellerman alone, because his archer and cavalry will die almost certainly, and his Kellerman alone will not be able to will not be able to single-handedly destroy Joe's third team. So if we take a look at the result here, it was actually fairly close. So let's see whether his cavalry managed to survive. So if his cavalry managed to survive, he would have actually had a chance, I think. So unfortunately, his cavalry did not survive. I'm not too sure if his cavalry would have been able to survive if he used a higher number of cavalry. For example, maybe some amount of archer and much higher cavalry, maybe a 1-to-1 ratio. Because if his cavalry is just so much stronger than everyone else's, like 1,600, this is very, very stacked. And his cavalry will be nearly immortal from whatever Joe can pull out. But to be honest, even if your cavalry is strong, it's still fairly difficult to resist the passive 2 of the infantry, which is very potent at destroying, especially the archer, of course, but also to some degree the cavalry. Now, the way If would have been able to win so his first composition had very little issue, I think. His first composition was fine, except for the fact that he should have used one archer. There's really no point of using more than one archer here. Maybe a slightly higher quantity of cavalry and some infantry, just to bring Kellerman down to a lower troop count at the end of the fight. The second composition, I think he should have used. So there's two choices he can take. The first choice is to use a lot of archers. And the point of using a lot of archers is so that it is able to survive the infantry. And I think because if has so much higher stats than Joe Zero, around 60,000 if archer is sufficient to survive the infantry. So I'll run 60,000 archers, maybe 30,000 cavalry, and the rest put it infantry. So he would be able to defeat Joe's 80,000 infantry without losing the archer, and then this team could do a lot of damage to this team. And even though if his team 2, if I were running it, may not be able to kill Joe's team 2, I think if team 3 will be able to kill both Joe's team 2 and team 3. And the way to do that is to, instead of using the season 6 cavalry hero, you use Morgan instead. And Morgan would not make your season 6 team much weaker if you were to put everything into the infantry. So you could either use Morgan in the season 6 team or Morgan in your team 2. It doesn't matter too much. Probably Morgan in team 2 is better, simply because if can run heavy infantry, heavy cavalry in this team, in team 1. And so by using Morgan in team 2, he would be able to free up his season 6 cavalry or Quinn using season 6 armor for team 3. And that is a very potent combination, Michael and the season 6 cavalry. And I will show actually in the next fight between me and General how that composition is, I guess, kind of good, both in attack and defense. Of course, there are ways to counter that. But I think it will do very well versus Joe's third team here. So he can run Michael and I'll just say Quinn with the season 6 armor, and Hanzo versus Joe's team 4 and team 5. And I would actually use a decent amount of a decent number of troops for Hanzo for 2 reasons. First of all, If will be able to kill a majority of Joe's team 2, meaning that his infantry hero will not be able to kill Hanzo. And the second reason is that Hanzo is actually very good versus Joe's team 3, because his team 3 simply does not have much capability of attacking the back line. And if Hanzo is able to survive, Hanzo will be able to deal a lot of damage to Michael. So yeah, that is how if could have easily won this confrontation. So going on to Warzone 2, we have me and JFK. Let me see if I could look at my battle results. So I forfeited this battle because there was no point. I think JFK used a good enough composition that I probably could not have won. So, I mean, I probably could have won because his team 3 kind of sucks, in my opinion. The composition I would have run against him as the attacker. And I think I actually did win a few times in the Arena of Legends, but this video is for the Apex Arena. And the way I would win against this kind of defense lineup, so this is kind of the classic season 6 defense. You have the GOAT team in team 1, so this is the strongest season 6 team. You have the full season 6 in team 2, and you have this variety setup for Michael, Hanzo, and Morgan in team 3, so Morgan or Quinn. And the way to counter that really is to run full season 6 team 1. So the way I would do that is, it's kind of hard to show here, but I would run full season 6 team 1. And if your stats are not significantly higher than his, then of course you will not be able to really do much of a dent on his Kellerman troops. So I would be able to bring this number down to about 130,000 maybe. So I would run a similar composition. I would run one cavalry, 1 archer, the rest infantry. And I don't mean full season 61. I would mean season 6 infantry, Morgan, and season 6 archer. So I would bring his troop down to 170,000. I mean, more like 130,000. And then in my team 2, I would run Kellerman, Quinn, and Lisbeth. And the idea here is to run 1 troop for Lisbeth. Now, this might be counterintuitive because people would want to keep the archer alive, but actually you cannot do that. when your enemy is running 130,000, like when they have 130,000 infantry left or anything over 100,000, unless your stats are significantly higher than them, like your infantry is completely stacked in terms of HP, if your build is like very heavily infantry centric, so you can see my stats are very heavily reliant upon infantry. And my cavalry are similar to his, my archer stats are similar to his, and in those cases, his infantry will just be able to destroy my archer. There's nothing I can do to save my archer, even if I were to put like 100,000 troops in my archer, it would simply die, guaranteed. So the way to counter that is to actually run one archer and run, once again, heavy infantry and a moderate number of cavalry. And a moderate is around, I would say, 50,000 is fine, but the idea is to run infantry and not lose the cavalry. So 30,000, 40,000 cavalry is fine, put the rest into infantry. And so you'll be able to easily beat the remaining 130,000 Kellerman troops. And going into Team 2, of course, you will have no archer. And the idea here is to have enough cavalry so that you can guarantee his cavalry will die. If his cavalry does not die, it will kind of be disastrous. Actually, it won't be disastrous, but you still want to just do a lot of damage to him. So if once your archer dies, the reason why you want to use more cavalry is that your infantry actually cannot really do much more damage anymore. So I can even go 1-1 ratio between Kellerman and my cavalry, who is probably Quinn. So my Kellerman won't be able to do much damage anymore, so the majority of my damage will come from my cavalry, but my cavalry unfortunately will die relatively quickly due to his infantry, because it is it becomes completely cracked when it's buffed by the archer. Hope I'm not losing anyone in this description, but basically what ends up happening is that coming out of the second fight, it was my Team 2. My Team 2, of course, it will die, or it will get timed out. And JFK will be left with about 120,000, maybe 110,000 infantry against my Team 3. Now here is what's important. If you were to run a regular Team 3 against this Season 6 infantry, your Team 3 will just simply die, because it will most likely get timed out and there's really not much you can do. But the trick here, because recall that I used Morgan in my Team 1, so now I'm able to use the Season 6 cavalry or Quinn with the cavalry armor in my Team 3. And the build for my Team 3 will be one archer, who is Hanzo, very important by the way, and then about 60,000 cavalry and the rest into infantry. So the infantry will have about 190,000 troops, 60,000 cavalry, and one archer. And the logic here is to have enough damage to be able to take out the remainder of the infantry. So the cavalry and the infantry will most likely be able to deal enough damage to this infantry. And so coming out of this fight, you will lose about half of your infantry and some of your cavalry. And the cavalry is actually very, very tanky. The only reason to use a higher number of cavalry is to increase the damage dealt by the cavalry. So going into Team 3, you will have your infantry and cavalry versus his team. And really the hope here is that they are using more archers, because the cavalry is always very good at taking out the archers, the Season 6 cavalry. And so you can see that JFK actually used 100,000 cavalry, and this would make my life easier if I had used the proper counter setup towards his setup. So that is the setup I will be using to win against this defense. So although in Season 6, although defensive positions have a big advantage, it is possible to counter them. And here was my clash versus General. So he was using a fairly classic setup. Once again, you have the strongest team in Team 1, the full Season 6 team in Team 2, and the classic third team in Team 3. Now, what I did was I did mention the setup I would use to counter against JFK. Now that setup is actually also a very good defensive setup. It is actually, in my opinion, one of the best defensive setups that a lot of people might not know about yet. But the setup is what I'm currently running, which is Morgan in place of the season 6 hero in the season 6 team. And because General is such a strong opponent compared to me, so if we were to take a quick look at the stats, you can see that the stat gap is just so incredibly high that you really have to do a lot of work to be able to defend against this. So the first team I used was something that I kind of described earlier. So I used 1 cavalry, 1 archer, and the rest I put into infantry. And the mistake that General made here was to not use enough cavalry, I think. His cavalry was fairly minimal, so my infantry was able to quickly dispose of his cavalry and prevent myself from taking too much damage. So you can see the contribution that kind of stats have on season 6 fights. And although as important heroes are, when you are running kind of the same hero setup, stats come into play. And now I want to quickly talk about mixing and matching heroes in season 6, because I see a lot of people running full season 6 teams and season 5 teams using season 6 Arma as a uniform team. And although oftentimes that is not a bad strategy, I think it is very suboptimal especially when you are defending against a stronger opponent. Because one thing that brings Kellerman such incredible survivability potential is his awakening skill. He is able to disarm your opponent. And whenever an opponent is disarmed, he actually misses out on 2 normal attacks. So that is preventing a large portion of damage. It almost halves their damage. That is how incredible Kellerman's awakening skill is. So accounting for how well Kellerman can survive on his own, it is sometimes a good idea to use the season 5's cavalry hero instead of putting him together with Kellerman. So instead of putting Quinn together with Kellerman or Lisbeth together with Kellerman, you assign them to the season 6 team. And that brings more survivability to the season 6 infantry hero. And that is very useful under circumstances when you think that your season 5 Arma team is good enough, so it can survive against whatever you're facing, but your season 6 team needs more help. So as long as you can survive as a defender, there's really no point in making it even stronger, because it is just going to die to the opponent's team too. And here you can see that I almost die. So it is kind of a tricky balance in just making sure that you can barely survive. But yeah, it is kind of like an optimization problem. So here I barely survive, and this is actually something I want to talk about. This is kind of a feature of Land of Empires combat. If you guys have noticed, and this is true across all seasons, whenever the battle itself reaches kind of like the halfway point, which is about the 1.5 minute mark, all buffs actually become disactivated. So, and that is really the key component contributing to why defenders are so much stronger than attackers in season 6, and the main component of how we are able to time out the opponent. Because if it wasn't for that the wipe of the buffs between both defenders and attackers, timeouts wouldn't really be a thing, pretty much. So looking at Team 2, you can see he lost next to nothing. So regardless of whether I had 6,000 troops or 60,000 troops, he would have not lost much. And that is because I don't have the archer support. My Kellerman would die very quickly. I don't have any defending support. I don't have any supporting buff from the cavalry. So my Kellerman would die simply because of how strong he is. If the stats were flip-flop, then I would have a much better chance if I had 6,000 troops compared to if I had 60,000 troops compared to if I had just 6,000 troops, as you can see here. So this is basically his full Team 2. So this is full Season 6 versus my mixed match team. And once again, look, taking a look at this composition, I think the composition here is very weak. Personally, if I were general, I would have used fewer archers. Well, first of all, if I were general, I would have used more troops. Instead of 212,000, I would have used, of course, 257,000 or higher. If he did use 257,000, I still have a chance of winning, but the balancing actually becomes so much harder for me. So you can see this fight was also very close, but because I won, it didn't really matter. His team would die. And the third team, so you can see the difference between me going against someone with very high stats versus what I just covered earlier, which is Joe Zero going against If, where the stat gap was much smaller. So there are two reasons to why I lost so badly. The first reason is that this is not Kellerman, so I am facing pretty much the full brunt of all the normal attacks that General can deal to me. And second of all, it is simply due to the insane stat gap between General and I. So I lost this fight without being able to deal much damage to General. And looking at the composition itself, I think I don't know why this composition is so popular, but I think it is a very weak troop composition. Well, first of all, assuming this is Hanzo, I would probably run more Hanzo, or I would run more infantry. Well, if I was in the attacking position, this would be fairly tricky, of course, because I'm running the best defense. What is probably the best defense. So really, what can General do against this? So if we take a look at the outcome of this fight, so I'm running Michael, Morgan, and I'm running Michael, the Season 6 Cavalry, and Hanzo. And so I just want you to look at how quickly the archer dies. So regardless of whether General ran 30,000 archer or 60,000 archer, the archer would have died very quickly. And the other thing I want you to notice is how tanky my cavalry is. The cavalry is actually unbelievably tanky, as long as two things are true. The first thing is that your opponent is not running the Season 5 cavalry, the Season 6 cavalry. And the second requirement is that your opponent is not running the Season 6 archer or the Arma. So I was able to quickly wipe out the General's archer and General's cavalry as well. And now it's just down to Michael. And Michael really cannot do much, because if it was Michael versus my Michael and my cavalry, he would actually be able to do a decent amount of damage. But because I put a decent number of troops on Hanzo, Hanzo is actually able to deal a lot of damage to Michael. And the reason why that is true is because Michael can only weaken the front line. So the front line infantry and the front line cavalry. He cannot weaken the archer. So the archer is dealing the full amount of damage to his Michael. And that's really what helped me win this third battle. And if we just look at the report, the damage report. So I expect Hanzo, so Hanzo was one of the key damage contributors, although I had very few troops equipped on Hanzo. And if I ran just Michael and the Season 6 cavalry, maybe one troop for Hanzo, I could probably still time him out, but it would have been a much closer fight. So now comes the question of what General could have done to win against my composition. And I'll have to think about this a little bit. I actually haven't thought about what he could be running. This is all kind of impromptu. So against my composition, so I'm running almost entirely infantry for the first two teams. Let me just double check whether that's true. Yes, so entirely infantry. So assuming that he would not be able to break through, so assuming that General is weaker than he currently is, I would probably run Season 6, full Season 6 against this team. And yeah, so what I would do is I would run full Season 6 against this team, try to bring Kellerman down as much as possible. And then similar to what I talked about against JFK, I would run full Season 6. The Season 5. So a mixed match of season 5 and season 6 against team 1 and team 2, and really the goal is to reach a point where my team 2 has about 110,000 troops or less, and I'm left. General is left with team 3. So team 3, I would actually run the same team as this team, and really the hope is that my stats will be higher than my enemy stats, so that my cavalry will be able to wipe out this team. So that my cavalry will be able to wipe out team 3 and team 2 and team 3. So it is kind of a mirror team. So I think a mirror team would be a decent counter to this defense setup. There might be better counters, and that is actually why we are kind of doing this review of different Apex Arena compositions, is to find surprising things that people might be running. In this third setup, we have Psycho versus Palm. So we have a mirror in team 1. So Palm is the attacker, so we don't really need to look at the troop composition. It is pretty reasonable why Palm lost. And in team 2, we can see that Palm lost the archer. And so here we can see that Psycho was able to survive with 105,000 infantry. Under this circumstance, it is actually very hard to keep your archer alive. So I think Palm would have done best to just run one archer here, because there's just no way he can keep his archer alive. This is fine, I think. I think the mistake here is that he ran way too few infantry. If you are going to run this few infantry, use Kellerman. You cannot use Frost and expect Frost to survive with only 47,000 infantry. Put Frost on team 1. You can see what they are running for team 1. Your team 1 is never going to survive. So just use the weaker team 1 against this team 1. And then team 2, you can run more cavalry. We can see here, like I can almost guarantee that Frost died before the season 6 cavalry. Let's see if that's true. Well, I hope it's true, because otherwise I look pretty stupid. So let's speed this up. So yeah, I would really never run Frost with low troop count. If I were to use low troop count, it has to be Kellerman. So let's see how well his cavalry performs. So his cavalry is actually very dominant. His cavalry is able to deal a decent amount of damage to Psycho's cavalry. Now, note that Psycho is also very strong. But if Psycho was weaker, then this would actually be a fairly reasonable setup, reasonable counter against his opponent. But we can see the infantry died very quickly. Now, if that infantry was Kellerman, I don't think the infantry would have even died before the cavalry. Okay, so actually let's move to a much higher war zone to look at the action that is happening. Greggy is Glorious 10, so we can probably make this comparison. Let's take a look at the stats. So the stats are not comparable, and because Greggy was on the attacking side, I think we could move on. And this is really a bit of the issue when we are doing these comparisons. If the stats are not comparable, then the win is purely due to stats rather than due to the actual composition. But let's take a look at this, because he was on the defending side, meaning that he did have a chance to win despite having much lower stats than his opponent. Typical defensive setup, once again, there's no point in using more than one archer. Well, 1,000, I guess it's fine, because you would risk your opponent running like a dummy team like this to kill your one archer. But I think even a dummy team, that is a very big cost to just simply bring down one archer, because as you saw in my earlier commentary, team 3 can become very powerful under certain compositions. So Doom is running a very interesting setup. So he is kind of crippling his team 1 and kind of betting that his team 1 would be able to survive despite not having an archer. And honestly, I'm not quite a fan of this, because first of all, he should have put Hanzo here instead of Lisbeth. If he put Hanzo here, then it would have been a more reasonable composition. And I think overall this is a rather interesting composition, because if I were just to picture in my head, you have the purpose or the whole purpose of this team is to just kind of try to survive. And really the question comes down to whether it can survive. And if you are stronger than your opponent, this might be a kind of safe composition to run as a defender. I'm not too sure about the attacking side because this team simply has no damage output. So against this team, I would run full season 6, just all infantry. And my season 6 is guaranteed to survive simply because of how weak this team is. And now it will be my season 6 team against his full season 6 team. And my season 6 team, because I have just so many troops, I'm guaranteed to knock out the archer. And then it comes down to his full season 6 team versus my season 5 Arma team. And I mean, I'm guaranteed to kill this team. I'm guaranteed to kill this team with my season 5 Arma team, while I'm trying to think whether I can keep my archer alive. Probably not. So the counter to this team, so my archer will die for sure, meaning that I would run heavy infantry and cavalry, but he is running a decent number of cavalry. So if I were to run cavalry, then he will probably just his cavalry will be able to do a decent amount of damage to my cavalry. So I would run 1-1, so 1 cavalry, 1 archer, and the rest on infantry. And I would be able to kill this team fairly easily with my season 5 Arma team. And now this team will face my season 5 Arma team. So the key thing that I'm kind of afraid of is that this team would somehow be able to survive with their archer. So my goal now is to kill the archer with my season 5 Arma team. So for this to work, he needs to use quite a lot of archers. Let's see if that's the case. So he did use a decent amount of archers. So I am guaranteed to kill the cavalry and maybe the archer. But let's say I do not kill the archer. I fail to kill the archer. And so now what happens is that you have a juiced up Michael and archer, whatever is remaining, versus my Michael and season 6 and Hanzo. And I think this is an issue for him because one thing that we should be aware of is although Michael is super boost, so Michael's attack is super buffed from this archer, Michael actually has very low survivability. So my Hanzo would absolutely crush this Michael. And yeah, he's just crushed. I don't think this is a very good setup overall. To counter this, I would run season 6 with Morgan. Second team, I would run the standard season 5. Like if you're afraid of Michael like hurting you, then I would run like Quinn instead of the season 6 hero. So I would run Quinn in my I would run this hero together with Kellerman, and then I would run Quinn with the season 6 Arma instead of the season 6 hero in my team 3, and this team would just be crushed. And I'm actually wondering whether that counter was kind of tried anywhere. So if we were to take a look at this composition, so this is once again fairly classic. The defense was this is a very poor use of Quinn, because one thing that we should make note of is that Quinn's charge speed buff actually really does not affect season 6 heroes. It might seem to affect season 6 heroes based on the description, but it actually doesn't. Season 6 heroes have a strict 15-second timing interval between their rage skill use, and the only thing that could affect that is Morgan. So that's something people should keep in mind. This as a defensive setup, I think it is very weak. His first team, let's see the troop composition. The troop composition is also very weak. I mean, Quinn will just get crushed, but he is also very weak, so there's no point going through that. Is this guy Glorious 10? No, he's not. So let's move on to, I'll probably do one more. Interesting. Both defenders lost here. Glorious 10, so we might take a look at that. Also Glorious 10, actually. So let's see what composition Leonidas is running. Fairly classic composition. Let's see what composition Sandy is running as defense. And yeah, this is very weak because this team is never going to get anywhere. I don't know why everyone is using Lisbeth plus the Hanzo armor. I hope it's not because of me. I know I talked about this a while ago, but that was like for Battle Disorder or something. But outside of Battle Disorder, or even in Battle Disorder, you really shouldn't be using you really shouldn't be using Charlotte with Hanzo armor. I would run Lisbeth. I would run Hanzo here, and overall, this is Team 3. This is not Team 1. Like, you do not want to run this team even with Hanzo in Team 1 because this team really cannot do that much damage to a Season 6 team. Like, you kind of hope to kill the archer, but you really won't unless you're significantly stronger. So if we just take a look at the result here, I don't expect him to lose even much of anything. We can see he didn't lose anything against his team 1. So this team was just completely wasted opportunity. Now, his team was also able to crush this team, interestingly. Let's see what was the composition. Like, why would you run so many cavalry when your cavalry is weak? Like, if we take a look at the stats, like, his cavalry is actually decently strong. But, his infantry is, like, he should have put this, like, cavalry investment maybe into infantry. Like, he would have had a better chance. But I think overall, he didn't really stand a chance. Like, against Leonidas, like, I would treat this as like me against general. So against this composition on the attack, I would just copy him. I would run full season 5 with season 6 armor against this team. So I'm guaranteed to survive in my team 1. And let's see how many archers. So this is actually a critical error from King Leonidas. I would see this and I would drool at this composition because it is very easy to beat. You just run this composition, but with 250,000 infantry, or more than that if you can. And then your surviving infantry, they will be able to kill the archer. And once the archer killed, his team 2 is crippled. So I would just run full season 6, or the Morgan setup, and I would run either the season 6 cavalry or the standard setup with Hanzo, and his team 3 will also be crushed. But I think that his team 2 is just crippled once the archer dies because his archer troops are just so few. My surviving Kellerman will be able to kill the remaining archers, and his team 2 is crippled. His team 2 cannot do anything to my full season 6 team 2, and my surviving season 6 infantry would be able to deal devastating damage to his team 3. So that is how to beat whatever composition Leonidas is running. Slice him up. Like, we can see, even though he won, this composition just is terrible. Let's see what... Well, I don't know who. Like, this is kind of a chicken and the egg problem. Like, it's not a bad idea to use your third team to counter your opponent's third team, but I wouldn't say it's even a good idea. Like, I wouldn't even bother with it. What this team kind of counters is that it counters full infantry 1-1 setups. So, for example, there's 10 seconds left before the formation locks, and you see your opponent running 1-1. And you can use this cheeky setup to just cripple his team 1. Although I'm not too sure whether that actually comes out as you having an advantage, because you sacrifice a team after all. But I'll have to see about it. So let's see the outcome of this fight. So team 1, they evenly traded. It doesn't really matter what the outcome is because team 2 would just end up crushing the other side. You can see it really didn't matter. They traded. And now we kind of have to look at the matchup between the remaining 2 teams. So Lord Hound ran full season 6, and this is not so bad versus his Slice's full season 6, except for the fact that he was not able to kill the cavalry even. And let's see why that is the case. First of all, he ran way too many archers. You don't need to run that many archers. So in a situation where you know you might lose the first fight, just run 10,000 archers. And where's your troops? Okay, he didn't run too many troops either, but let's look at the stats actually. Yeah, his stats were just too poor compared to Slice Mup. So I'm not too sure whether he even had a chance of winning, especially considering his troop count was relatively weak too. But this also comes back to when I spoke about the mix and matching, or if you see your opponent running full season 6, like this is the strongest team in season 6, just run the same team, and that will guarantee your survival. Like if his team 3 was his team 2, like flipped, like his team 3 would have easily been able to survive against Slice's team 2. And let's see how many archers Slice was running here. So he ran very few archers. So I think Lord Hound could have easily won in this matchup by simply running. Well, he didn't even have to use his team 3, like just wasted sacrifice. He could have just ran. He could have just ran his season 5 Arma team against his team 1, just crush it, get it out of the way, and then survive against Slice's team 2. Like even though Slice used a lot of cavalry, I don't think that this amount of cavalry can really cut through like Kellerman. Kellerman is just so freaking tanky. Let's see how close this was actually. Here. So if Kellerman can survive against whatever Slice was running, then it's a win for Lord Hound. So let's speed this up, and after this I will conclude part 2 of the Apex Arena review for season 6. So I expect the cavalry to deal a lot of damage, and I think the mistake that really Hound made here was using too many cavalry. The moment he used too many cavalry, he instantly lowered the damage potential of the infantry, because the infantry is affected by the troop count of the entire army. So if the troop count of the entire army goes down because your cavalry died, then your infantry damage instantly lowers. So this was weighted very heavily against Hound. But I think that if he used Lisbeth, who has the inherent damage reduction skill, if he used Quinn, and finally if he used Kellerman, he would have been able to resist the composition that Slice was running. And even if, I mean, like that is kind of the condition that Hound needs to accomplish in order to win this match. And of course, him running this few troops didn't really help his cause. So let's see the actual damage. That is not what I wanted to see. I wanted to see this part. Right, so it is rather hard to survive against the cavalry, especially if the cavalry has decent stats. I think Hound really didn't have very good stats for his infantry either. Let's see if his Kellerman is any better. So his Kellerman is actually better. So I think his Kellerman would have really performed much better than his season 6 hero. So I hope everyone enjoyed my second video on the Apex Arena. I plan to have many more of these in the future, especially covering maybe season 7, and I hope to also be able to pick out just a few examples where the matchup was relatively even from earlier seasons to showcase different compositions for heroes as well as troops and how they match up in attack and defense. I'll see everyone in the next video.